do we get started? We got almost 500 people already, just like that. Welcome, friends. We are doing this special live Substack. To many of you, the gentlemen joining me are familiar faces. We have Juan Proaño, who is the head of LULAC, and we have Carlos Espina, Carlos Eduardo Espina, who is the man with one of the largest social media followings in America, and a frequent guest on immigration issues, on border issues. Welcome to you both.
Well, thank you, Jen. Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
It's
thank you for
always fun.
having us.
Carlos, you have your own Substack now. Tell us about it. What is it? How do you find it?
Yeah, so it's just my name, Carlos Eduardo Espina. It's also Mi Gente News because I had to make like a name. I was like, oh, Mi Gente, which for those of you who don't know, Mi Gente means my people in Spanish. So that's like my opening line in all my videos on TikTok. Yeah, so I make content on TikTok in Spanish about immigration, politics, social issues. I just hit 13 million followers on TikTok. And, ever since Trump took office, people started telling me, you need to post more in English, post more in English. And so I found Substack. I was like, hey, this would be the great place to post them in English. I also opened my English, TikTok account. But people just really need to know what's going on in English as well in their language. So we made an account and here we are, and I'm so grateful to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you. And you're absolutely right. I mean, 13 million people, my Lord. But you're right. There are so many people in the English speaking audience that really don't have a visceral sense of, what's going on. And this is some really dark times. In Juan's neck of the woods, you have this facility in Florida. You still have raids going into parks where children are playing, going into workplaces. What's kind of the mood? Is it depressed in your community, Carlos? Is it anxious? Is it angry? What's kind of the sentiment?
Yeah, I would say a lot of confusion, fear, frustration. Some people would even say betrayal. Not me, because I didn't vote for Donald Trump, but some people did vote for him, and that they would characterize that as what they're feeling. But overall, it feels like, how could I explain? There's like a dark cloud lingering over our community and has been for many months now. Things just don't feel the same. I don't know if people understand what I mean by that, but you go outside, and even myself, that I'm a US citizen, you just don't feel the same energy, the same happiness. You go to restaurants that used to be full and now they're empty. People are canceling events left and right because they're afraid of immigration, ICE raids. I mean, the mood is just not there. It's depressing, but there's also optimism and hope, because I always tell people, we live in a democracy, and these things, we have a chance to change things. And so I always try to, inject a little bit of that spirit of, in Spanish, there's a saying that says, no hay mal que dure 100 años. There's no bad that lasts more than 100 years. Hopefully this one won't last more than 2 years, because in the midterms, we'll be out there. But yeah, it is a very difficult time all around in every aspect of life, not just politics. You go play soccer, you go eat, go everywhere. You feel it all around you.
Absolutely. Someone says in the audience, call it dread. It's really interesting. We've been hosting the FIFA World Team Cup, and those crowds have been pretty sparse. People don't want to go out. And a colleague was just saying his wife works in a children's hospital. People are not bringing their kids in for inoculations. So it's like, how do we live like this? I mean, it's certainly not what people think of, Carlos, when they think of America.
Exactly.
One, the silver lining for all of this, if there is one, is that the more people see of what is going on, the less they like it. And we've seen some remarkable polling lately. What does that tell you about Americans' attitude toward immigrants, toward these ICE raids? What are you seeing in that data that may be a sign of hope?
Well, I mean, there's clearly a marked shift in regards to the attitudes. I like to call those Latinos that voted for Trump repentant voters at this point. We have a lot of them here in Miami, Florida specifically. And so, what they voted for was obviously, a stricter enforcement, if you will, around the border, which is what we're getting. but also, deportation of criminals. They didn't necessarily vote for the indiscriminate deportation that we're seeing. They did not vote for the militarization of an immigration enforcement system, and they certainly did not vote for the tremendous tax cut for the rich and over $160 billion that's going to DHS, ICE, and all varying agencies for this increased immigration enforcement action that you're seeing. So I think that's a really cold shower for folks because they now see it and feel it basically out on the streets. But, let's talk a little bit about that silver lining. We won a birthright citizenship case. There's now a national injunction, something that democracy defenders and LULAC and ACLU have been working on, along with a lot of partners and allies. So we're really grateful for Norm and the incredible team of lawyers that we actually have supporting us there. Carlos and LULAC, we actually launched a petition on July 4th. The president has actually said that he wanted protection for agricultural workers, for hospitality workers, and for workers in the meatpacking district. We're asking him to keep his word. We had over 100,000 signers in the first 24 hours. We've just passed 160,000 signers, and so we're going to continue to promote that. And for those of you that haven't signed, please go to lulac.org and sign the petition.
Carlos, Texas has always been this very red state, or at least in the last, couple of decades. Do you think this is changing attitudes about the Republican Party, about, so-called conservatives? Are people getting a better look at, there's been this sense that, oh, the two parties are the same, there's no difference. Is it beginning to sink in that there's a really big difference between these two political parties?
So the issue that I encounter the most, right, is people are very dissatisfied. Obviously, there's always going to be the people who are ride or die with Donald Trump, no matter what he does. But I think the majority of people are starting to realize, this guy isn't what they thought he was. For whatever reason, they thought he was going to be good. He's not very good. What I'm worried is that, disdain and frustration towards Trump and the Republican Party doesn't automatically translate to support for the Democratic Party. I think Democrats have not been efficient enough in showing an alternative vision for this country. We know what Trump stands for. He stands, helping the rich, screwing over poor people, screwing over immigrants. But what do the Democrats stand for? I think the average American, average person I speak to every day really struggles understanding the messaging. And it is complicated because I do feel like at a national level, Democrats are very fragmented. You have some running this way, some running the other. I mean, you had yesterday Fetterman goes on Twitter and says, ICE, he's defending ICE. So how can the Democratic Party find a route when you have, one guy saying one thing, another person is saying another, and those divisions are felt at the very local level. So I'm worried that a lot of this is just going to lead to more apathy, more, people being like, hey, I don't believe in either party. And I think that's why we need to have, maybe a rebranding, remember what our values are as a party, as a, or whatever you want to call us, group of people. What are our values? What guides us? And I think specifically here in Texas, there is a lot of room to win some ground, but we have to be strategic about it, especially in the Latino community. What I always say, the biggest downfall of the Democratic Party here in Texas has been basically allowing Republicans to run with what it means to be religious, what it means to be Catholic, what it means to be Christian. One of the things I've had a lot of success on social media is framing issues from a religious stance, but a more progressive stance. Because if you look right now, if you're, today the Archbishop of Miami, he came out and said, what's going on in Alligator Alcatraz, that's wrong, that's messed up, that's unholy. And we need to be seizing on these moments when you have the Pope putting out messages saying, the leaders of the world are betraying human values. These are things that we need to embrace. I think, obviously, I'm not going to say, hey, you should be this religion or another, but Democrats have gotten really scared of messaging along religious lines, and Republicans, especially, after the whole Roe v. Wade overturned and all that, they really leaned into him. So a lot of Latinos voted for Trump along those religious because they feel, the Democratic Party doesn't believe in God, this, and that. And like I said, everyone can believe what they want to, but I think we are able to win back a lot of voters if we say, hey, Donald Trump is not just doing immoral stuff, he's doing unholy stuff. He's doing stuff that goes against God's word. He's doing stuff that even the Pope disagrees with. And that's a big opportunity to bring people back, especially in Texas, because I think Latinos in Texas are very, progressive on some issues, but also very conservative on others, especially when it
Right.
comes to religion. So how do we make those inroads? And I think there's a lot of room to grow, and I'm hopeful for the future. Despite everything going on, I'm hopeful.
Oh, absolutely. There was just a report that at the Archbishop said, you don't have to come to Mass if you're afraid of
Yes.
ICE. This is like, this is the attack on religion. They're always talking about an attack on religion. They're going into places of worship. They're going into churches to get people out. Um, but what Carlos says about values is so important. Juan, we've talked about this big, ugly bill, taking food away from hungry children, taking healthcare away from working people, feeding this, sort of stormtrooper machine. That really can be translated, can it, in moral terms? What happened to love thy neighbor? What happened to, I was, hungry, you fed me? I mean, these are religious values in some sense.
They are, and I grew up in, what I would say would be and most Latinos grow up in would be religious conservative families.
Right.
And so we find a lot of single issue voters, primarily around, abortion, for example, or same sex marriage. But the attitudes have changed significantly. And so when you take a look at first generation, second generation Latinos born in the United States, have assimilated more. And so there's definitely this growing divide between older Latino values and these younger Latino values. But there is an opportunity here, Jen, for the Democratic Party to capitalize on what's happening. You just have to go back to 1994. California's Prop 187, which Pete Wilson tried to basically push through, was the catalyst for California to go blue for a generation, right? Literally for a generation. And we had hundreds of thousands, millions of Latinos actually coming out in force to oppose that in California. And then what we had, which the Mega Marchas, the largest movement in this country in recent history, over 1.5 million Latinos. We're building up to that now. What you saw, for example, with No King's Day was a lot of that participation was actually driven by the immigration issue
Yes,
as well.
absolutely. Carlos, are there some politicians, either local ones or national ones, that you look to and you say, that person really gets it? They're speaking, from the heart. They're speaking about values. Are there people that we can look to as kind of role models or as mentors for other Democrats to follow?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting point that I always make because people really struggle. The divide right now that we seem to have in the Democratic Party is between progressives and moderates among policy lines. I think the divide more is not so much around policy, but about energy and your
Yeah.
willingness to fight for the people. What do I mean by that? We've come to an age where people, obviously policy matters. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but more than policy, people care about, people who are actually in the community, who are actually, out there meeting people where they're at. And, for example, you look at the race in New York City, a lot of people say, oh, Cuomo lost because of this or that. I think it just came down to the one guy was on the streets meeting people, talking to them, shaking hands, and the other one wasn't. I think even if the policies would have been flipped, it's that persona. So the Democrats I look up to are the ones who are traveling the country, doing town halls, the ones who are, speaking to people. Some of them are moderate, some are even kind of conservative, some are, progressive. And I think this is what the Democratic Party needs to understand. This blanket messaging for every single group does not work. And like Juan was saying, around the election, I did a lot of, help trying to, get Kamala elected. And people would say, why don't you talk about abortion so much? It's like, it's an important issue. I'm not going to say it's not. But if I go, speak to a conservative community and I lead on the issue of abortion, my messaging is not going to stick. I need to talk about other issues and understand who you're speaking to and where you're speaking to them and find that common ground. Because I think the Democratic Party has really turned a lot of people off with these purity tests where if you have to agree with me on 100% of issues, hey, you don't have to agree with me on abortion, but as long as you agree, that poor people shouldn't die on the streets because they're homeless, then we can work together, and I think that's the direction we need to move in. But the only way to achieve that is having politicians who are actually on the ground, whether they're progressive, conservative, moderates. And the reality is that whether we like it or not, that's what people felt with Donald Trump. They felt like he was connected to the people. He pulled that McDonald's stunt. He was doing major rallies. He goes around and signs people's stuff. it's old school populism. I know populism is a scary word, but there's a way to do it correctly, ethically, morally. And I think that's the direction, being basically the party of the people, running left and right all over the country, talking to people, doing town halls and engaging.
Absolutely. Some of the better politicians, have a saying that, people aren't going to listen to what you have to say unless they believe that you care about them. And I think, some of these bread and butter issues, relating to working class people, middle class people. One, what is a good solid presentation to working class Hispanics? Is it to lean into the immigration issue? Is it to lean into bread and butter issues? Is it all of the above? What do you find is the best way to kind of get people to rediscover the Democratic Party?
So, let me talk about it from a personal perspective, right? So, in our household, we talk about a lot about health insurance. That's really important for our family. These cuts that we're seeing in Medicaid and Medicare will impact my mom, for example, who is of retirement age as well. My brothers, sisters, but more so the community at large. So, giving them $400 tax break, but then passing on the bill of up to $4,000 per family in increased cost, that's just not going to fly. We can't ignore the immigration issue. And I think for the most part, Latinos have actually moved a little bit more to the center on this issue and maybe even center right, where they would support, for example, stemming the flow of immigration at the border. They would support deportation of immigrants with a serious criminal history. But the one thing that they're very concerned about is deportation of immigrants that have been in this country for 10 years or more, where they've
Exactly.
established a business, they purchased a home, they have children who are US born Latinos. And so that's where that fear comes in. So we have to tackle it, we have to address it. We need Democrats to stand up and do so in with a very strong voice. And so I've been looking at like Jimmy Gomez, for example, in California, who's out there pounding the street, for example. He's done a really good job. We're looking at, Aaron Ford, the Attorney General, or Raul Torres, the Attorney General in New Mexico, or Keith Ellison, who's also had a very strong voice as well. So we've been leaning a lot on the Democratic AGs around the country, and we will continue to meet with, Democratic elected officials. But we are trying to build a bridge with the Republican Party. In Miami, you have Representative Maria Elvira Salazar, Diaz Balart. You've got three Cuban Republicans here who oppose Trump on TPS. They support due process. They did not support Abrego Garcia being deported to CCOT, for example. So there are Republicans that we can work with, potentially pressure to get to some point to get some positive legislation out there.
Carlos, how are you finding Substack so far? Are you having as much fun as we are? Does it work
No,
for
I
you?
really enjoy it. I'm still getting the hang of it, but I think it is a good place to have a lot of interesting conversations. Especially along the lines that I'm able to reach an audience that maybe I don't reach with my traditional
Yes.
content. I think, speaking here with people who maybe aren't as aware of the everyday struggles, of the immigrant issue or the Latino community in general, is really how you make change. Because, look, I've always said this: I'm much more sympathetic towards white MAGA supporters than Latino MAGA supporters, and I'm going to tell you why. I grew up here in Texas. Most of the white people that I know, or people who aren't Latino in general, they're not necessarily anti-immigrant because they hate people because they're racist. They've just been fed a lot of propaganda their whole life. They turn
Yeah.
on Fox News every day. They would listen to, morning radio, and they genuinely believe that our country is infested with criminals and rapists and all these people. And so I've learned that once you start, having these conversations with them, they start to realize, hey, maybe what I'm seeing on the news isn't true. I've seen it a lot, in College Station where I grew up. A lot of people are like, hey, it goes back to when I was in high school, that this is like one of my big political awakenings. I remember it was the first Trump election, and it was me and my friends on the soccer team. We were like half Latino, half not Latino. We're talking about the election, and this one guy, he's my age, probably like 16, 17 at that point. He's like, yeah, I support, Trump. We got to deport illegal aliens. And then my friend is like, hey, did you know I'm undocumented? I came here when I was 4 years old. And that was like a shock moment for him. He's like, damn, I didn't know that. And like those conversations, when you have them, it really shatters people's perspective to the point where now I've met a lot of people, who aren't from my community who I've spoken to, like, hey, after speaking to you, I understand that the issue of immigration is not necessarily what I've been told. Now, why my frustration with Latinos and why I'm not as forgiving is because Latinos understand these things. They understand, like the complexity, and still they decided to willingly go. And obviously, they did a lot of mental gymnastics, And so I feel more bad for people who did stuff out of ignorance than did stuff out of, And those are conversations we're having. I mean, I get a lot of like, the other day there was this Cuban lady. She went on Telemundo and she was crying. She's like, my son got, arrested by ICE, and I feel so bad. And I'm like, I feel bad, but I kind of don't, because you live in Miami, you interact with immigrants every day, and still you decided to do this. So it is frustrating at times, but I think those conversations still need to be had. So being on Substack, being on other platforms, I mean, it's just really powerful. But like I said, I'm a very hard line. Like I have a lot of these difficult conversations with Latinos who've like, they come to me, they're like, oh, I feel bad. I voted for Trump. I'm like, well, you made a mistake. You got to admit to it. And like, you knew about it. You knew it was going to happen. This is what it is. Now let's move forward. But it's
I,
interesting.
I think that is such a great point, that we tend to assume ill will of other people who disagree with us on these core, human issues. But a lot of it is ignorance. A lot of it is propaganda. A lot of it's fear. And, if you can meet people, there are a zillion studies that show that one-on-one or in small groups or directly, someone they trust, then you can make some progress. Then you can help, kind of bring people out of their news cocoon. Um, Let me end with this. Juan, LULAC is in every state, I believe. They're in the territories. They're so much. Um, Big picture view. Are people understanding the need now to get engaged, to be engaged? Are they understanding that politics, Carlos has this message all the time, democracy is the only way forward. We're not going to win this by, scrolling on our phones. We're not going to win this even solely in the courts. Do you have a sense that people feel, okay, this is our moment, we got to do it?
There's no question that there's a reckoning now. Everyone knows what the stakes are at this point. The concern is obviously now that this administration has all the funding and resources that they need to escalate this even further. And so, for us, we're appreciative, Jen, of you, the contrarian audience, that you're uplifting Latino voices. Carlos is really just one of the best voices that we have in the community. I would definitely say that LULAC gave Carlos a scholarship. One of his first visits to Washington, D.C. was on a
Yeah.
LULAC scholarship. And
And I
so,
was in high school in 2016.
and so, look, organizations like LULAC are incredible, have an incredible history, but we're underfunded, we're under-resourced. We need the support, but there is no question. Our membership has grown significantly in the last 6 months. We now have over 575,000 members, and our goal is to get to over 1 million members by the end of this year. And trust me, we will educate them. We will give them all the resources that they need so they can be fully engaged in the 2026 election cycle and make a difference, right? And I think that they will vote in a different direction moving forward.
Well,
Yeah.
that
And
is a
on that,
hopeful.
I wanted to add one last thing. I think this is
Yes.
something especially that's important in the Latino community that many people don't realize. I think the biggest issue we have in our community is that people don't fundamentally understand their rights. They don't understand the history of this country. They don't understand basic civics. And what I say, we can't be expected to defend our democracy and stand up for our rights if we don't even know what our rights are and what democracy means in a true sense. I mean, this isn't, for example, when I was promoting, the No Kings Day, so many people were like, "Oh, why are you protesting? You're gonna get arrested." I'm like, the First Amendment of the Constitution says that I have a right to go and protest. But if you don't know that right exists, then you don't know what you're fighting for. So I think, I can't speak for every community, but I think at the Latino community, something major needs to happen in the sense of educating people on civics, on the history of this country, on the Constitution, on how Congress works. I saw it around the big beautiful bill. People don't understand even what's the difference between the House of Representatives and the Senate. So how can you be expected to vote in a midterm election to choose new representatives if you don't even know what you're voting for? You don't even know who is who. And I've tried to do a lot of that because I think basic civic education and history is the stepping stone. It's like the foundation. You can't build a democracy if you don't fundamentally know the ground that you're standing on. So I think that's something, LULAC has done a great job on. I've tried to do my best, but we really need to educate, because if you go down to why did so many Latinos vote for Trump, if you, keep digging and digging, most of the time, and people might get offended, it comes down to ignorance. That's the truth. They don't understand. They'll say, oh, I'm mad because Biden didn't do this for immigrants. And I'll say, well, did you know Biden didn't have the numbers in the House and the Senate? Oh, wait, he can't just sign an executive order? I'm like, no, that's not how it works, But if you don't understand how things work, you make decisions that go against your best interest. So that's my final, closing point, supporting those initiatives. LULAC does a great job. Many people are doing that great work, and we just have to keep going.
Absolutely. Well, you two are two of the most important voices out there. 13 million people, over 500,000 people. And those people then become teachers themselves, then become advocates on your behalf as well. So great meeting with both of you. Carlos, we love having you on Substack. We love Substack because you can have this very transparent, very intimate conversation with people. And we know you're going to be as huge a hit here as you've been on social media elsewhere. So have a great weekend, guys. We will look forward to talking to you soon. And thank you to our contrarian audience. It's your support that helps us introduce new voices and lift those voices up. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
I think, you're supposed to say subscribe to us? I don't know how it works here on Substack. Subscribe to me, and also the contrarian if you're not already, and all that stuff. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
You've got
everybody.
a better sales job than I am. Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jen.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.